Expired home return permits will be valid again, helping travelers to the mainland. Controversial MPF mechanism will be abolished on May 1st. First head of National Security and Police Force shares feelings before retirement. Hello and welcome to TVB News. In a bid to address the huge bottleneck on the renewal of home return permits to the mainland, the National Immigration Administration announced today that authorities will extend the validity of expired home return permits starting on the 5th of May. The measure covers home return permits with an expiry date between January 1st, 2020 and December 30th, 2023, which will be extended to the end of this year. Timothy Lee has our top story.
Many Hong Kongers have wanted to travel to the mainland since the reopening of the border earlier this year. But many face difficulty when trying to renew their expired home return permit. Permit service centers, such as this one in Kowloon Bay, were packed with people every day. Some who came said they registered for the renewal service online a few months ago, but could only get the documents in early September at the soonest. The National Immigration Administration announced today that starting on the 8th of next month, home return permits with an expiry date between January 1st, 2020 and December 30th, 2023 will be granted an extension to December 31st of this year. This man said he was delighted by the news, since his home return permit is set to expire in 2 weeks, and was worried that it will take several months for the document to be renewed. This woman said the measure will benefit a lot of people, including her family, who are trying to visit the mainland this year. Chief Secretary for Administration Eric Chan, who is currently in Beijing, thanked the central government for implementing the unprecedented measure. To accommodate the demand for home return permit renewals, China Travel Service announced that starting today, it will extend working hours until 9:30 p.m. at 2 of their permit service centers in Kowloon Bay and Sha Tin. Renewing the home return permit has been a challenging process for many people since the reopening of the mainland border. The measure announced today has been widely welcomed, and it will make things a lot easier for many people who want to travel to the mainland. Timothy Lee, TVB News.
Chief Executive John Lee confirmed the mandatory Provident Fund offsetting mechanism will be abolished starting May 1st, 2025. This was revealed when Lee was attending the Labor Day reception held by the Labor Department. The arrangement bars bosses from raiding employees' pension savings to cover their long service payments. To help employers adjust to the new policy, a $33 billion subsidy scheme will be rolled out for employers, which will be in place spread over 25 years. Under the preliminary plan, the government will take up half of these severance and long service payments in the first year. That's given such expenses for the enterprises do not exceed $500,000 in the first 9 years after the new MPF arrangement is in place. The proportion of the subsidy will gradually reduce to 20% in the 9th year. The government's amendments to the Occupational Safety and Health Ordinance took effect today. The maximum penalty for offenders has now been raised from $500,000 to $10 million. Despite the harsher penalties, the city saw another fatal workplace accident around noon today. A 64-year-old worker plunged to his death from the 4th floor of the Alliance building in Sheungwan. He was working high on the exterior wall to clear air conditioners. He was rushed to hospital before being later certified dead. Deputy Police Commissioner Edwina Lau is set to start her pre-retirement leave tomorrow. As the first head of the National Security Department, she said authorities had received some 400,000 national security-related reports from the public, which showed the public's support for the law. Mimo Sangay reports.
The career of Edwina Lau is concluding after devoting 38 years to the police force. Lau, aged 57, had served in multiple roles, including units handling fraud and commercial crime. In 2020, the year of the implementation of the National Security Law, she was appointed to head the National Security Department of the police force. Lau said the appointment was an ultimate honor, adding there were some challenges at the beginning. She explained officers only had a short amount of time to figure out the meaning and application of the new legislation. Lau said over 250 people have been arrested under the law, while 150 were prosecuted. Or were found guilty.
The national security law, we are very pleased to see that we've formed an architecture in Hong Kong.
Lau said potential risks to national security still exist even if Hong Kong is peaceful at present. She used the national anthem blunder as an example to illustrate her point, saying the police authorities are still investigating the incident. Commenting on criticism that the law is ambiguous, the senior official disagreed. Lau said the courts conduct independent trials on national security cases and people should read the court's rulings and the reasons given for them. In addition, she believes the public backed the law as over 400,000 reports have been made to the National Security Hotline. Meanwhile, Lau said wearing tags for demonstrations is reasonable, adding those who criticized the requirement have ulterior motives. Mimosanai, TVB News.
A product of the Indonesian instant noodle brand Indomie has been found to contain a carcinogen. This led authorities in Taiwan and Malaysia to recalling the product. While the product is also available in Hong Kong, the Center for Food Safety has not yet responded on the matter. This special chicken flavor Indomie is found to contain ethylene oxide, a harmful substance that is carcinogenic. In Hong Kong, Indomie is one of the popular instant noodle options for many residents. This woman said she is concerned about the general food safety of the Indomie products as she tends to buy a box of them a month. However, Indonesia's Food and Drugs Agency said the product passes its food safety standards, but urged the manufacturer to ensure their products do not have high levels of ethylene oxide. In the disrupted South China Sea, there was a standoff between vessels from China and the Philippines last weekend, but authorities only released the information Thursday. It marks the latest in a string of tense maritime interactions between the two countries. Jackie Lin with more.
A high seas face-off, less than 45 meters apart. On Sunday, two coastal patrol vessels from the Philippines sailed near a contested waterway between China and the Philippines in the South China Sea, with journalists on board. Then a Chinese Coast Guard ship closed in.
This is a solemn statement. According to the Chinese laws and the international laws, China has indisputable sovereignty over islands in the South China Sea and their adjacent waters.
This latest flashpoint, Second Thomas Shoal, also known as Sernai Jiao in Chinese or Ayungin Shoal in the Philippines. The Philippine Coast Guards radioed back, saying they were undertaking lawful maritime patrols.
That the Ayungin Shoal falls within the Philippine Exclusive Economic Zone. Request to stay clear from our passage in accordance with the collision regulation.
During the standoff, Navy ships from both parties also sent out smaller boats. When the Philippine vessel attempted to maneuver towards the disputed shoal, China's patrol ship tried to block it. Both sides came as close as 45 meters. The Philippine side reversed its direction and shut off its engine and left the contested seas. Filipino officials on board the vessel requested journalists not to release the tense moments captured on camera before they reported the incident back to Manila.
In
Beijing, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs said the atoll is part of China's Spratly Islands, adding the Philippine Navy intruded into the region without China's permission and deliberately engaged in premeditated and provocative acts. They stressed the Philippines should respect Chinese sovereignty and stop actions that will further complicate the situation. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
Beijing's Defense Minister General Li Shangfu is attending a conference of Shanghai Cooperation Organization countries in New Delhi today. The ministers are discussing issues including regional security and counter-terrorism efforts. The meeting comes a day after Defense Minister Li said that conditions along China's tense, high-altitude border with India are stable overall. Li said China and India have far more common interests than differences. He added the two sides should take a long-term view, put the border issue at an appropriate place in bilateral relations, and promote the normalization of the border situation as soon as possible. China and India have been locked in a nearly three-year-old standoff involving thousands of soldiers stationed along their disputed border. Coming up, hundreds of Chinese among foreign nationals evacuated from Sudan. Controversy over whether the U.S. leaker of Ukraine military intelligence should be granted bail. South Korean president makes speech in U.S. Congress. Welcome back. Many countries are continuing the evacuation of their citizens from conflict-hit Sudan. Chinese naval vessels carrying 678 people have arrived in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. At least 512 people have been killed and close to 4,200 wounded by the fighting since the crisis in Sudan began on April 15th. Tracy Furness has more.
A total of 668 Chinese people and 10 foreign nationals that were evacuated from Sudan arrived at Jeddah Port, Saudi Arabia on Thursday. A team of Chinese diplomats and officials were there to assist them. Some evacuees recalled their experience leaving Sudan.
Thanks to China. Yeah, that's wonderful. It's a hard time. And then getting out of the country, you feel like you are very safe with them. And then they bring you to the safe location. That's very nice.
The evacuation lasted for about 3 days. The whole process was really not easy for us. I am grateful to the Chinese embassies in Sudan and Saudi Arabia for their help, said Wu Hao, who was working at the University of Khartoum. And the first batch of 35 Chinese nationals that were evacuated by bus from Sudan to Asmara, the capital of Eritrea, departed for China Thursday. Meanwhile, people have been flocking to the Egypt-Sudan border to escape the violence as the humanitarian crisis worsened in Sudan. According to the Egyptian Foreign Ministry, their country has received more than 16,000 foreigners fleeing the deadly conflict, including more than 14,000 Sudanese. And hundreds of Indonesian evacuees arrived in Jakarta Friday. The Indonesian foreign minister and the country's army chief were on hand to welcome the first group of 385 people back from war-stricken Sudan. Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi said the country's air force will help evacuate the last group of Indonesians from Sudan on Saturday. A White House spokesman said Thursday that the situation in Sudan could worsen and are telling U.S. citizens to leave the country within the next 48 hours.
So following intense negotiation, the Sudanese Armed Forces SAF and Rapid Support Forces RSF agreed to implement, as you all know, a 72-hour nationwide ceasefire starting at midnight on April 24th, which was about 2 days ago. While there was an initial reduction in reports of violence, we are deeply concerned by the increase in ceasefire violations yesterday. We urge the SAF and the RSF to fully uphold and extend the ceasefire.
Tracy Furness, TVB News.
Pope Francis has arrived in Budapest in Hungary. He has met with Hungarian President Katalin Novak and Prime Minister Viktor Orban. The Pope will also deliver a political speech to the country's authorities and diplomats. Francis is in Hungary to minister to the country's Catholics, but with the war unfolding next door in Ukraine and issues concerning LGBTQ rights, the Pope's words and deeds will carry strong political undertones. The Pope is also set to meet with some of the 35,000 Ukrainian refugees who have remained in the country after fleeing the Russian invasion of their country. There's controversy over whether the U.S. Air National Guardsman accused of leaking intelligence secrets on military supplies to Ukraine should be released on bail. Prosecutors want him behind bars, but a judge at a federal court is considering the arguments. More from NBC News.
Tonight, former Massachusetts Air National Guardsman Jack Teixeira's fate is in the hands of a judge, with federal prosecutors urging the court keep him behind bars until trial, saying he's a flight risk and may still have classified material that could have tremendous value to hostile nation states. The judge opting to consider arguments and issue a ruling later. In their new filing on Teixeira, who's charged with leaking highly classified military documents online, prosecutors allege the 21-year-old took steps to conceal his actions. Authorities finding a tablet, a laptop, and an Xbox gaming console smashed in a dumpster at Teixeira's home. Prosecutors allege he has a troubling history of making racist and violent comments on social media. Last November writing, "If I had my way, I'd kill an expletive ton of people." In Teixeira's bedrooms, prosecutors say they found an arsenal of weapons, including handguns, rifles, an AK-style high-capacity weapon, and a gas mask. Teixeira is accused of leaking damaging information about China, the war in Ukraine, as well as documents that reveal how the U.S. is gathering intelligence on its allies. The U.S. is under pressure to determine why an airman in tech support had access to some of the nation's top secrets.
The sad reality is that it seems like our Department of Defense has less of a rigorous insider threat and vetting process program in place than even corporate America does.
Teixeira has not yet entered a plea, his lawyer calling him a 21-year-old kid who lives in his hometown and would stay with his father if released. For its part, the Air Force has now suspended 2 commanders from Teixeira's intelligence unit, pending an investigation.
South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol addressed Congress on the 4th day of a state visit to the U.S., marking the 70th anniversary of the alliance between Seoul and Washington. Daniel Rao tells us more.
Mr. Speaker, the President of the Republic of Korea.
South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol was greeted with a standing ovation in a packed U.S. House of Representatives chamber by members of the House and Senate. In his speech to U.S. lawmakers, Yoon paid tribute to the U.S. during the 1950-53 Korean War and its partnership with Seoul since the end of the conflict.
The Korean people rose from the ruins of war to build a thriving nation, and at every step, America has stood together with Korea. We have many reasons to celebrate our platinum anniversary.
The South Korean leader said it is necessary to speed up trilateral cooperation with Japan and the United States to counter increasing North Korean nuclear threats.
My government will respond firmly to provocations, but at the same time, we will keep the door open for dialogue on North Korea's denuclearization.
That South Korea would actively work to safeguard the freedom of the people of Ukraine and support their reconstruction efforts amid Russia's ongoing invasion of the country. Yoon is the 7th South Korean leader to address the U.S. Congress, underscoring the close relationship between Seoul and Washington. Yoon later met with U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin at the Pentagon. During their talks, Austin reaffirmed the U.S. extended deterrence commitment to South Korea, which includes a full range of U.S. defense capabilities, including conventional, nuclear, and missile defense capabilities. The Pentagon said Austin and Yoon also exchanged views on the security environment on the Korean Peninsula and in the Indo-Pacific region. Dan Orell, TVB News.
BBC Chairman Richard Sharp resigned today after an independent report found he breached rules for public appointments in relation to a loan for then UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. The country's public appointments watchdog has been investigating the way in which Sharp was selected by the government to chair the broadcaster in 2021. The report found that while he did breach the government's code for public appointments by failing to disclose a potential conflict of interest, that breach did not necessarily invalidate his appointment. Sharp had agreed to a request to stay on until the end of June to give the government time to find his successor. And back locally, Shatin Racecourse will undergo a renovation next year. To minimize the impact on horses, the Hong Kong Jockey Club is transferring some horses from Shatin to its racecourse in Guangzhou. Earlier this month, 35 horses were transferred to their new home, Konghua Racecourse in Guangzhou. Before they departed, some basic safety precautions had to be taken, such as feet binding. And now they're ready. Konghua Racecourse is a resting and training facility for Hong Kong's racehorses. Since its opening in 2018, 860 cross-border trips to transport horses have taken place. And a clarification, the abolition of the MPF offsetting mechanism will take place on May 1st, 2025. That's the news. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend.